Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sportsbook Confidential. My name is John Sullivan, and I'm coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in Seneca Falls, New York. And this little show here is to help you learn and grow as a sports bettor. So I appreciate you tuning in today. Last week we had audio difficulties, which were totally my fault. So I apologize for that. And to make up for last week, I'm going to do a quick review of the program we did last week. And we're also going to talk about looking for edges in sports betting with the return to play formats. Some things to think about. What happened in Aussie Rules this past weekend really got me thinking about if the bookmakers are kind of in a bind right now with trying to set accurate lines. They may not be trying to set accurate lines, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. And, of course, we've got the weekend in Aussie Rules and NASCAR. We're still waiting on the NHL and the NBA to get back to play. Baseball, we have no idea what's going on there. Of course, football, the professional football, NFL and CFL will start in the fall. We don't know what's going to happen with college. There's a lot up in the air, and I'm not going to spend this episode rehashing everything I talked about last episode that you didn't get to listen to. But we will talk a little bit about what I wanted to talk about last week. But before we do that, let's start by updating my bankroll. And even though I didn't have any sound last week, I did have a winner. And we did lose on the Western Bulldogs in Aussie Rules, and that was minus 15 to the bankroll. They got blown out. But in the NASCAR race, we did have a winner with Denny Hamlin at plus 900, 9-1. And that was a plus $68 to the bankroll because I only put a half a unit on Denny. I also put a half a unit on Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski, so those were both losers. But if you do the math, that is a profit of $38 for the weekend. And that puts my new bankroll total at $477. And dividing by 30, as we always do, that makes our bet size going forward $16. So let's talk a little bit about last week. And the gist of what I tried to say last week is that eyeballs are the new currency of sporting events going forward. Just like we talk about in social media, how it's all about clicks and likes and engagements. Well, eyeballs are the new the like or the retweet of live sporting events. That's what is going to generate, that's the business model for all sports going forward. And because of, that you can realize it from two different perspectives. Obviously, from the pandemic perspective, there's a limitation on how many people can go to a sporting event. But even if you talk about an actual physical stadium or an arena, there's a limit to the number of people you can fit in there. There's a limit to the number of bags of popcorn you can sell, and peanuts and beer and soda. That business model is a 20th century business model. And we're in the 21st century now, and TV revenue will be even more important if stadiums have physical limitations to generating future revenue. So now stadiums will have to redesign to include social distancing, which means more things like luxury suites and more luxurious seating for high-end customers. It's going to price the average Joe out of the arenas. And so therefore, the majority of the revenue will come from television, will come from broadcasting rights. And of course, this will affect how leagues negotiate with the players. The NHL and the NBA and the NFL, I'm not sure about the Major League Baseball, but they split the revenues with the players. The owners get X percent of the revenue, and I think in the NHL it's like 53 to 47 or something like that. And as the owners are going to have to rely more heavily on the television revenue to stay in business, that is going to change dramatically, because they are going to, it used to be all the ticket sales, all the merchandise sales, all the concession sales all went into the pocket of the ownership. And if that's eliminated, it changes the whole dynamic of the business. So this is going to affect how the leagues negotiate with the players, and the hook, the barometer of this new business model of eyeballs on the sporting event will be getting the fans to participate in the broadcast, whether it's through tweets, it's through fantasy, it's through sports betting, it's through PR. This is the new normal. This is the challenge. Interactivity, that's a key word. And the sport that does the best at interactivity with its fans, with its viewership, is the one that's going to be the most successful. And that's kind of what I covered last week, and in a less than 5 minute nutshell there. I could talk about that for probably another 20 minutes, but we're not going to rehash what I did last week. But very interesting times. It'll be very interesting to see how these leagues go forward and how the labor and the management, can negotiate through this. Baseball's having a very difficult time, and I hope that they find a way, but I would not be surprised if the baseball season was canceled. So here's something that I want to talk about. I called this a guessing game, but I was looking at Aussie Rules last week, the results, and there were 9 games. And if you look at the results, the team that was not favored, the underdog, against the spread, plus the points, they went 8-1. And then if you took that same underdog on the money line just to win straight up without the points, those games went 6-2-1 in favor of the underdog. So obviously that was a very unusual event that was not expected. So it was just, we talk about the concept of variance. For those of you not familiar with that term, if something is a 70% chance of winning, like if you're in a poker hand or whatever, and so out of 100 times you'd expect to win that 70 times, but there's times 30% of the time you're going to lose, but you may run that same simulation over and over again, and you might lose 4 or 5 times in a row, and that's just called a variance to the bad, variance to the good. If you win, 85 out of 100, that's variance to the good. If you lose 40 out of the 100, even though you're only supposed to lose 30 out of 100, that's variance to the bad. So is this just extreme variance, or are bookmakers challenged to put out an accurate line? Now, I feel like it's mostly the challenge, and it's not that much variance because you have teams coming back from an extreme layoff. You have teams playing without crowds. You have very little data to go on for the new season, new rosters. It may be that the bookmakers may not always want to set the most accurate line. It usually gets hammered into place after the bettors bet on it. They may not move a line because they want to take action on one side or the other. But you can be sure that if sharp bettors bet the underdog money line, bet plus 300 to win a game, plus 350 to win a game, and those teams win, the bookmakers will move those lines in the future. They will not. They don't want to give them. They don't want to give themselves that risk. So if somebody respectable bets on these underdog lines, they will move them to mitigate their risk. So this has me thinking: if the bookmakers are challenged to put up some decent lines or accurate lines, are there betting edges to be found in this new normal of sporting events? We have all these sports returning to play in new formats, and they're going to be playing at, like the NBA's playing in one location and the NHL's going to be playing in 2 locations. Major League Baseball's talking about returning to play in 4 locations. I know MLS is working on a return plan. I don't really follow MLS, so I can't really comment on that. But this is all uncharted territory for sporting events, and there's going to be wagering. They need, again, going back to the interactivity. People need that diversion. They need the diversion of being able to watch the sports. They need the diversion of being able to place a wager on it. There may be some edges here, so let's talk about that for a little bit. And I'm going to start off by stating the obvious, and that's home court or home field advantage. And is there none? Now, there can be a yes or a no answer to that. Obviously, the teams are playing in the same venue. They're practicing at the same venue. They might even be staying in the same hotel. They're going to get to know each other pretty good. I feel like there may, for the most part, there is not a home field advantage, and you should eliminate that from your model. But if there's a, if they play in Columbus for the hockey, obviously, if Columbus makes the playoffs, they're going to have a little bit of advantage. And then any team that plays there on a regular basis, a team that might play there 4 or 5 times a year in their division, that travels there often or lives close by. I don't know what the next closest team to Columbus is, but Pittsburgh probably. So I feel, I also feel like experience in playoffs will be a big factor in the NHL for sure. I don't know as much about the NBA. The NBA is going to finish their regular season, and they're going to have kind of a little play-in for the last seed in the 16-team playoff. I'm not really sure how it works. There's 22 teams in the West and 9 teams in the East. And it seems kind of convoluted to me, and I don't think there'll be a whole lot of interest in those last games of the season. But you would think that any team that's a serious championship contender would be resting their better players up until the playoffs actually start. So we have a shorter or no preseason, less evaluation, more surprises. And this is a great example of especially the NFL when it starts this fall. I don't think they have a full preseason planned, and I feel like they might have scrimmages. They might have the team scrimmage and not, maybe they'll televise them, but they won't be full-out preseason games. This will be, I feel like there are certain teams that are good at preparation, will surprise a lot of fans when the games actually play. And you're finding that out in the Aussie Rules League right now because they are not, the strength of these teams are not what they were predicted to be. Richmond looked really bad 2 nights ago. They've been a championship contender for the last 2 or 3 years. It looks like that time has passed for them. St. Kilda looked awesome. They've always been kind of a middling team. North Melbourne and Sydney are going tonight, and Sydney's considered to be a middling team, but I think they're much better, even though Buddy Franklin isn't playing as one of their stars. It's hard not to take the points in Aussie Rules right now with the uncertainty of, there's not much data to go on. So the people that set all of their lines via mathematical models do not have a lot of input on the current season. So again, the whole point of this is to provide good betting opportunities. And underdogs are going to have large value this summer, as some teams will adapt to the circumstances better and upset the expected outcome. So, the one thing I did not talk about is the larger playoff format, future bets. Now, for those of you that don't follow the show regularly, future bets are betting on a future outcome, such as to win the championship or win the Stanley Cup or win the Super Bowl. And there's 24 teams in the NHL playoff right now, and you don't even really know how the seeding is going to shake out just yet. You just know which teams are going to be in the playoff. It's a good time to place a futures bet on the Stanley Cup. Now, if you can place a bet, you can place a bet on a team to win the West or a team to win the East or a team to win the Stanley Cup. And, if they get to the final, you can always hedge that by betting the other team to win the Stanley Cup. But there are some teams that have a lot of experience that snuck their way in, that might get healthy and might get a lot better, since the play stopped 3 months ago. A team that comes to mind is the Blackhawks. They're going to be a tough out. If their goaltending's healthy, You have to consider all phases of the game. But if you can find very good odds on a team, you can always hedge out of that. If you can get a team at 50 to 1 or 100 to 1 and they get close, they get to the Western Final, well, you can hedge out of that bet by betting on the other team to win the series. So there's lots of profit opportunities to take profit on some of those long shots. But there's value in underdogs because there's so much uncertainty surrounding these upcoming sporting events and circumstances that we've never dealt with before. And that that's if your goal is to make profit, here's the books are going to be offering extreme value. And as a matter of fact, in a few minutes I'm going to talk about the NASCAR race and value. So that's the lesson for today. Looking for edges. I don't have any great specific examples to give you at the moment. I haven't really looked at the futures for all of the teams, but maybe we'll talk about that when the exact dates are announced. So before we get to the NASCAR, let's look at Aussie Rules this week. And we've got week 3. We've got 7 games left this week. There was one this morning. Western won, I believe, this week. They didn't really put up a great effort for me last week. So we got the Sydney Swans and the North Melbourne Kangaroos. North Melbourne is 2-0. Brad Brown's their best player. He's kicked 3 goals in each of the first 2 games. They're looking to be one of the 2 favorites to go 3-0 and be one of the 2 favorites to go to the final, the other being Port Adelaide Power. I think Sydney's going to give them problems. It's the experts have been totally wrong on this season so far. Maybe the variance goes in the other way and all the favorites win this week. It's short term, it's hard to predict the results, but I feel like 10 points here. The games have been very tight with even opponents. They've been 3, 4, 5, 6 points. I feel like this is one of those games. I like Sydney here plus the points, even though Buddy Franklin's not playing. They have North Melbourne has a pretty deep injury list. They do have their best players on the field, but I think that's going to be a close game. St. Kilda at Collingwood. St. Kilda played awesome last week. They really surprised me. They go to Collingwood, who I think has had a long rest. I like Collingwood here. I think they're definitely a playoff team this year. I don't like the spread. If I had to choose a side, I would take the points here. I think St. Kilda's underrepresented, but I will stay away from that game. And the West Coast Eagles at the Brisbane Lions. I've said before on the show, I think the Lions are an up-and-coming team. They're still young. They're going to stumble along the way. I expect them to be in the top 8 to make the playoffs. West Coast has had some really good success in the past few years, have not shown a lot yet this year. I do think this is going to be a close game, and I'm not touching it. There's not good enough odds on either side to take a side. Carlton Blues at Geelong Cats. Geelong was in the Final Four last year. Carlton has been considered one of the basement dwellers for a long time. They actually won against the spread last week. It was a 1-point game, and they were 33-point underdogs or something like that. So I don't know. 18 points is a lot. They're shorter quarters right now. They're 15-minute quarters. I can't in good conscience take the Cats there. I expect it to be a little bit closer. Adelaide Crows at the Gold Coast Suns. The Gold Coast had a big upset last week, and I think they're going to move from being a bottom dweller to a middling team. Adelaide is on the way to becoming a bottom dweller. They really got thumped by Port Adelaide last week. Don't like this game. Again, there's not good enough odds on either side to take either team. I'm going to pass. Melbourne Demons at Essendon Bombers, and this is a game where one of these teams is probably going to blow out the other. But, again, it's when the bookmakers put up these lines, 2-point lines, it's essentially a pick-em game. And there, at this point in the season, there's not enough to go on. to pick one side or the other. These teams are very similar. They even wear very similar uniforms. I can't. There's three games that are -2. I can't pick either one of them. And then finally on Sunday, Port Adelaide Power at the Fremantle Dockers. And you know my motto is never bet on a team named after Chino Pants. And Port Adelaide is clearly the number one team in the league. They are the best team in the league. They've shown the best of all the teams. Whether they finish number one is yet to be seen. But even though the spread is 17.5, I like Port Adelaide here a lot. And assuming they don't have any major injuries during the game, I expect them to cover that spread. So, moving on to NASCAR, we have the Geico 500 at Talladega. And Talladega is a restrictor plate track. Both Daytona and Talladega, they have 4 restrictor plate races every year. And for those of you that don't know what a restrictor plate is, they actually put a metal plate on top of the engine that restricts the flow and the horsepower, so the cars all run equally, so the speeds don't get too high and make it too dangerous if they crash. So basically, all of the cars are equal horsepower, and it's all about drafting and drafting partners. And I'm not a big fan of this racing format, but from a betting perspective, I'm a huge fan. And you can see that I've written on there restrictor plate bingo. Anybody can win. Anybody can win with a little bit of help. And I call it bingo because you have to avoid crashing. And there's 2 strategies. One strategy is to get out front. And obviously, if you can get out front, everybody's behind you. So as long as nobody crashes you from behind, you're safe from a big wreck behind you. And then the other strategy is in the beginning of the race to go to the back of the pack and wait for the pack to thin out and then come forward. And what usually happens is when you get to the last 15, 20, 25 laps of the race, everybody's trying to charge forward. They're going 3 and 4 wide on the racetrack, and eventually there's a crash, wipes out about half the field, and then the other half is left. So my strategy is to pick a long shot. Now, pretty much every track, every week when I look at NASCAR, I look at the drivers and who has a very good history at the track. I look at which teams have a very good history at the track, which teams have a legit shot of winning, and then I look at the odds, and I pick my drivers based upon what offers the best value. So if you see at the top, I have Roush, Hendrick, and Childress. Those are the teams that have done the best at Talladega. Roush is Ryan Newman in the 6 and Stenhouse in the 17. Hendrick is the 8 and the, I can't remember which of the other cars, the 3. And Childress is the 8 and the 3. And the Hendrick is the 24, the 48, the 88. The 88 was Dale Jr.'s car with Hendrick. He brought over massive amounts of restrictor plate expertise that he learned from his father. And the 88 is definitely a car that I would be interested in this race. But all the Hendrick cars, if they've shared that knowledge with all the Hendrick teams, I would not be surprised if they compete for the win here. So let's take a quick look at the odds. I've got them up here on the screen for you. And you can see that Chase Elliott is a Hendrick car is the favorite. But Keselowski and Logano. And then Denny Hamlin, who's done really well this year, Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, Harvick, Kurt Busch, Amarola, who has a win at Talladega, Truex, Boyer, there's Stenhouse Jr., Alex Bowman, who's in the 88. He's 22-1. Those are insanely great odds. He has a very good chance of winning this race. So for those of you who have not followed NASCAR this year because of the pandemic, they do not do qualifying. They just draw random starting positions based upon where they are in the point standings. If you're in the top third, you draw the first round. The middle third, you draw the second round. And the last third, you draw the third round. So getting back to handicapping this race, these races, the Daytonas and the Talladegas, are the races that you want to pick somebody with super long odds. It's okay to pick a favorite, but you want to consider, taking somebody that, like a 30, 40 to 1 shot. They have a legit shot of winning this race. And the other thing you might want to consider is the top 10s, because finishing top 10 in a restrictor plate race is something even the lesser teams can do. It all depends. Some of the lower teams that don't usually compete for the win will team up with some of the super teams, and they'll help push them, and they'll carry them along into a top 10. So there could be value there as well. So let's finish it up and take a look at my picks. I'm going to start tonight by taking the Sydney Swans at plus 9.5, minus 111. I know North Melbourne's a heavy favorite here, but I feel like Sydney can keep it close. We'll have to see what happens, but something to sweat on Friday night if you would like. And then Sunday, I'm going to be very vanilla and take Port Adelaide minus 17.5. They're the best team in the league. I feel like until they prove me otherwise, they're worth a wager. I don't know if I would take that at 20 points or 30 points, but at 17.5, I like that a lot. So for the NASCAR race, I'm doing a nice little combo here. I'm going to take Joey Logano plus 900 for a half a unit. He's had tremendous success at Talladega, so he's going to be like my favorite. And then I'm taking these 4 long shots at a quarter unit apiece. We're going to take Bowman at 22 to 1, Alex Bowman. William Byron in the 24 at 30 to 1. Eric Jones, which is a Gibbs car, at 33 to 1. And Ryan Newman in the Roush car at 40 to 1. So a quarter unit each there. So I'm spending basically a unit and a half on the NASCAR race, and we'll see how that pans out. So at least hopefully I'll have one of those cars running at the end of the race. So that's going to do it for today's show. I'm glad we had sound, and I hope that you got to see the whole show today, and we'll be up on YouTube if you want to check it out at a later date. And I'll be back next week with another episode. We'll have some more sports betting talk for you, and hopefully some more information on all the upcoming playoffs. And with that, I'm going to play the outro music for you, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Take care.